Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Victory Leaders Lounge. My name is JJ Hardy, and I have a guest here who does a ton in the veteran and first responder community. His name is Matt, but I'm going to let him introduce himself. Matt, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Matt Payne. My wife and I, Buffy is my wife. We have Outer Circle Foundation. We are a nonprofit. We help veterans and first responders with PTSD awareness, suicide prevention, and transition help. All of our transition help is really soft skills. So it's building online presence, it's resumes, it's interviewing, it's business acumen, it's corporate culture, things like that. So everything in that space.
Wow. Well, after we're done shooting this, I think I have a connection for you.
Awesome. Always happy to help.
Just you saying that, you know when good people will strike each other as other good people. So,
yeah.
So tell us a little bit more, Matt, about how you combat the or maybe support with the PTSD. I mean, could be either way. If you're working with the government, it's probably combat. If you're working with individuals, it's probably support. But just tell us a little bit more about that. I'm interested in hearing that.
Yeah. So just a little background about me. So my dad actually was in Vietnam. He was killed when I was 2 months old. So I never really got a chance to meet him. It was always a struggle for me growing up. But I ended up going into the military right out of high school. I was a combat controller in the Air Force. And very, very few people know of combat control. We're kind of the little entity out there on the special operations side. When I was in, there was about 230 of us in the world. We've done everything from Grenada all the way through Somalia and then into the war and now the war on terror and all of that. But long story short, I walked around for 35 years and, I talked to my counselors now and I really walked around just thinking I was, just wired wrong. I was just an idiot and, just a kind of a bad person and just was different than everybody else. Now I'm learning that no, it's not you, it's the PTSD. It's all of the things that you've carried around with you, not only from the military, but then after I left the military, I became a police officer and you carry all of that stuff around with you. And, for the longest time, I looked at things and I was like, the guys coming back now that have, they're missing limbs or there were, caught in Humvees that were on fire and they have burns over their bodies or they've done this or done that. Those are the guys that are really needing all the help. But it's more than that, right? It's there's a ton of guys out there that need the help. And, I left the military back in 1995. So a long, long time ago, way before the war on terror and, a lot of all of this stuff. So when I looked at it, again, right, we didn't have a whole lot of stuff that was going on. Yeah, we had Somalia, we had Panama, we had the first desert and different things. But, it was different then than it is now. And our goal from an outer circle perspective is to help break the stigma and help those that are dealing with issues not walk around and drag this along with them like I did, right? Mm-hmm. Because I've had relationships that were ruined. I've had friendships that were ruined. I've had a lot of different things that have gone on in my life that never should have happened based upon what has gone on. And had I known then what I know now, it would have been a totally different ballgame. So the goal is, how do we help people identify the issues, help them get the resources and help they need, and then get on with their lives and move further along with it, both from the law enforcement side. And that's a whole different side of the house than the veteran side. And we can talk about that, sure, further. But yeah. So that's ultimately what we're doing.
When people think of PTSD, the first thing they think of is combat. And
Right.
what they don't know is that
Yep.
people that go to a combat zone may not always experience combat firsthand.
Yep.
However, there's always the support personnel. Think about those guys that are flying the drones.
Yep.
That have to blow people up on a regular basis, and hear everything that's happening in the background, or
Yep.
maybe blow up a vehicle, and there might be some nearby bystanders, and just or watching an operation happen from above, and being reporting back on that because they're
Yep.
seeing the whole thing happen. Or those guys that they're support, but they're listening and listening back at the sheriff station.
Yep.
That's what they call it downrange, the sheriff. But
Yep.
listening in and just hearing all of this stuff happen while they're reporting it back and forth through the chain of command. And I think that PTSD can be fostered in a combat zone in so many more different ways. And I'd like that you talked about police officers, because it's not just them, right? There are
Yep.
women out there who have bad things happen to them. There are people who grow up in abusive relationships, and when they move on to have a career either in the police world, law enforcement world, or first responder world, or the military, where they go into a combat zone, whatever PTSD they may have from what they were dealing with when they were growing up, it doesn't take that much to make it so much worse. So it's such an important thing that you're doing. So
Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell you. So our pastor at our church, right, is they adopted a child, and I know he wouldn't have a problem with me talking about this, but he went in, and the child was from China, and they had the child for a couple of years. He went in to wake the child up from, she was several years old, wake the child up. And this was several years ago. And she had passed in her sleep. He has PTSD from that. It is any trauma, and it doesn't matter what the trauma is. And everybody thinks it's got to be, war or shooting or it's any number of different things that
Correct.
are there. And it could be any number of things. And when we talk about first responders, it's not even only cops and EMS and fire. It's DIFAS workers or DFACs or nurses or anything. It's anybody who deals with something that is seeing the bad that goes on with people's lives that is above and beyond what normal people would see in their daily life. And
right.
That is just part of what goes on. And that's one of the things that we're trying to bring to the forefront, is that it's trauma can affect anyone at any time, at any place, regardless of what you're doing or where you are.
You are so right. And, I have found that even outside of any of those industries, just having a toxic work environment, which is why I provide new manager training, because that's something when you serve a long time in the military, that's just kind of inherent. We learn that over and over and over again. But when you work in a toxic work environment and you don't know how to get out of it and you need to pay your bills, that's something that translates to PTSD as well, because you're stuck. And it's a significant emotional event. Anything that's a significant emotional event can trigger somebody.
Absolutely.
So I'd be interested in hearing, though, you said there are some differences with law enforcement and maybe even first responders and fire department, but you mentioned specifically law enforcement. I'd be interested in talking a little bit about that. What are some of those differences?
Yeah. So, the biggest difference and what we're finding, and it's based upon the state. And one of the biggest issues that we're coming across is, in a lot of states, PTSD from a law enforcement perspective is viewed as a mental illness, not a workplace injury. And
wow.
Yeah. So you don't have any of those workplace benefits, the workplace guarantees, right, with those. And, it's detrimental when you look at, the ability of somebody in that capacity to get the help and the resources they need with the confidence of keeping their job, right? And that's where I'll boil it down. And there are some states that have some of those guarantees, and there's some other states that do not. And that's one of the big efforts that we're focused on, is trying to make sure that they have that guarantee that, look, when I started as a cop, I did not come in with a mental illness, right? You vetted me to make sure I did not have a mental illness when I started this job. Otherwise, I would not have gotten my job. Through the course of what I did on the job, whatever that happens to be, crimes against children, homicide, arson, whatever it is, has caused me to raise my hand and say, hey, I am having some issues dealing with whatever it is, and therefore I would like to get some help. And as we've seen in the military, right, when you look at me as a combat controller, that they've put in millions of dollars in training me as an individual, right? It's not I raise my hand and they say, we don't need you anymore. There's a million more behind you that we will just plug in behind you. That's not the case at all, right? It is, how do we get you the help you need in order to make sure that you can now go on and continue to do your job, with making sure that you have all of the resources, you're in a good spot mentally, you're doing everything that we need to do to get you back to where you need to be in order to continue doing your job and fulfill your mission and do everything, right? All of that. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to be doing with law enforcement, not just, hey, we'll work you out of the system because there's a million others behind you. That's not the way to do it, right? And we need to have all of that benefit there. And you've seen the rise in suicides with cops and with firemen and with EMS and everybody else out there. And, you know, through research, we've seen some of the statistics that will tell you one of the biggest things law enforcement is dealing with right now is loneliness. And loneliness being the fact that they don't have anybody to talk to, right? Yeah. And they're not going to talk to EAP. That's part of the department. The wives, I mean, I can talk to my wife, but my wife doesn't really understand the things I'm going on at my job, right? They don't understand those things that are happening. There's some things we can do better. And that's some of the things that we're working on, and some of the things that we as Outer Circle are going to focus on and really see how we can, you know, affect some change from the policy side of the house, as well as from the treatment side as well.
You know, it's interesting. When you're serving in the military, you don't think that other organizations would be behind where they're at, because the military feels like they're so far behind in everything that they're doing, and communication is everywhere. But, you know, the fact that they embraced, the government has embraced the military in that, and the military itself has embraced that, you know, seeking help for a PTSD or depression or whatever the case may be, it's an important thing to make sure that you can keep yourself right and continue serving. And if it gets too bad, you know, they do filter people out as well. But don't you think that, I mean, obviously you do, because you just said it, but gosh, why wouldn't the state entities recognize this for their own law enforcement as well? Especially since, I mean, they're fighting wars here on a domestic level, because there are so many populations that want to get up and take their phones and record police officers while they're trying to do their job. And even when it's the most chaotic time, they have somebody with a doggone camera in their face. And I think that's wrong. And, you know, so they see these things that the police officers are dealing with, even all over the news, but yet they haven't taken any decisive action to make it, to end the stigma for them, as like the military has started to end it for the service members that are serving.
Some of the things is I have heard, right, and again, right, different states are having a problem defining what first responder is, right? And, you know, I mean, you have the people that file the reports, and they're reading reports and they're reading very graphic things, right? Is that a first responder? Or is it the guy with the badge and the gun, or the women with the badge and the gun on the street, right? And they're having a really big time defining that. And then it gets buried into these laws that, as you know, as a law goes up in front, it's buried with all other kind of things that have to get packed in order to do other things. And it's not just as simple as this is what it's going to be, and here's what we need to do. It's
No.
much more involved than that.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate unintended consequence that comes along with it as well.
Yeah. To me, it should be federally mandated, but
Right.
when even when it was federally mandated for the military, I mean, I was serving during the time where they started making mental health accessible for those people that were still currently serving, and not making it a hit on somebody, because when they would review that on their record, when it would come time for a promotion or a lateral move to a position where they would have personnel working for them, or whatever the case may be, you know, they would really take, it could end people's careers if they had a mental health concern. And it didn't have to be PTSD. It could have been depression or any number of things. And one thing that we've started to embrace, and they should do this for all audiences, first responders, gosh, that there should be no fine line. If you have to deal with anything in the process, a psychologist would agree to this, because I've talked to people like this, that if you're involved in the process of having to see or report or have conversations around something that is so hard as dealing with death or anything traumatic for somebody else, you could have that could affect you in a traumatic way. So I don't understand how anyone in that first responder chain that you're talking about couldn't be considered a first responder. Because you never know when somebody's going to deal with something. All it takes is once. All it takes is one time. And so that's really not, to me, that doesn't seem right. But I mean, firefighters, I mean, people, I mean, even a doctor or a nurse or somebody who checks people in an emergency room, I consider those people in the same mix. It doesn't have to be the people that are out on the front lines getting them to the hospital. But wow, that's really interesting that they don't embrace that yet.
And that's, you know, we're working through a variety of different organizations and different entities to see how we can work through. I'm working through some states to see which states have it. How did you get it passed? What is the framework of that? And can we bring that bill back and see if we can get it into other locations? And then, you know, how do you get it into the federal framework and make it, you know, because let's put it this way. If I break my leg I'm on a business trip and I break my leg, I'm covered under workman's comp, right? And I don't know if it's a state or a federal or whatever, but, you know, whatever it is, it should be in that same vein, right? And these are some of the very early on aspects that we're working through. And, you know, we're learning every day as we go. And, you know, we're connected up with Brian Moore at the AIM Center here, and he's at Kennesaw State. And he is probably, and he hates it when I say this, but he is my number one go-to PTSD and law enforcement guy in all of the nation. And he's got a ton of research. He is just a great guy, former military. He's still an Army officer in the reserves and does a ton of stuff. But he is doing a really great stuff with PTSD and law enforcement. And we are so blessed to be working with him, you know, as well. And, you know, it's just really good trying to surround ourselves with those people that really are, you know, leading the frontline efforts in this aspect, and really surrounding ourselves with that.
And if you don't mind me asking, Matt, what state are you currently located in, so that the audience can hear it? Georgia.
Yeah, we're in Dallas, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta.
Okay, very good, good. Yeah, it's a pretty big military population in Georgia. I mean, some of the largest Army bases are down there. But so wow.
And, you know, so I'll tell you, right, and I'll tell you kind of how my journey unfolded and what I found as things progressed. So, you know, like I said, for 35 years, I did not know that I had this. And it got to the point where my fuse was really short. I was not sleeping at all. And if I did sleep, it was fraught with nightmares. And my nightmares got to the point where I was kicking and punching and hitting and different things at night. My wife was like, oh no, we are not dealing with this at all. And so went out and we found a therapist local that deals with PTSD. And we started, kind of going through, and she put me through all kinds of assessments and things. And really assessed and said, look, you don't have PTSD, you have severe PTSD. So she said, look, I can't prescribe medicine, but I would like to put you in front of a psychiatrist and at least talk about some medicine aspects of things. And she goes, I don't know if you need any or not, but let's just start that conversation. So I had a 20-minute telephone call with a psychiatrist on a phone call, not a video call, just a telephone call. And, you got to think about how much can you talk to somebody on a phone call, right? And get to know somebody in 20 minutes. At 20 minutes, and this is the problem that I have with the mental health field, she diagnosed me as bipolar. She had me on 3 of the harshest medicines I have ever been on in my entire lifetime. And the only way I can describe it was I was drunk 24 hours a day, like wobbly kind of drunk, not knowing where I was or anything. And I did this for about 4 days. And I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and I couldn't stand up and I crashed into the nightstand and stuff went flying everywhere. My wife was like, oh yeah, we're not doing this either. So we were out of that. And I called my therapist and I was like, yeah, we're not doing this. So I started doing some research and I came across Dr. James Lynch. And luckily, so combat control was broken up into a couple of different areas. And I was at JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, at the end of my term. And Dr. Lynch was at JSOC. He was one of our docs there. And after, at the start of the War on Terror, he saw all the guys coming back and he started doing a ton of research on PTSD. And there has been a process out in the world called the stellate ganglion block, the SGB, for a long, long time. And the SGB is a process that was used in rheumatoid arthritis. It was used in pain treatment. It was used in a couple of different things. And basically you have bundles of nerves in your neck. You have 2 on the right side and 2 on the left side. And these bundles of nerves connect your autonomous and your sympathetic nervous system, which makes your fight or flight system. Mm-hmm. So Doc was like, hey man, I can basically reset this, which resets your fight or flight system. So I got connected up with Doc Lynch. Doc is up in Annapolis, Maryland. And so in order to see Doc, you had to be in therapy. He talked to my doc or my therapist. He did a pre-intake form of me and came up. And I ended up being bad enough where I got the ganglion block on both sides of my neck. And like I said, when I say I wasn't sleeping, it was like 15 minutes here. There would be days where I just wouldn't sleep and I would go, forever. And I wear a Whoop on my wrist and it monitors my sleep. And so I went up and I was on the table and the doc, he does a ultrasound of your neck and he maps out your anatomy and injects anesthetic in the bundle of nerves. The needle was not out of my neck. And he goes, Matt, how do you feel? I said, Doc, this is going to sound like the weirdest thing ever. But he goes, I said, I'm a 10-year-old boy. It's a beautiful summer day. I'm wearing overalls. I'm sitting on a wooden dock. I have a fishing pole next to me. I'm looking at a crystal clear lake. There's not a cloud in the sky and my feet are dangling and they're not touching the water. I've never done that. That's not a memory. I have no idea where that came from. But the only thing after talking to the doc, he goes, your mind goes to the most relaxing thing that it can possibly go to. And that's where my mind went. And wow. So then he did the other nerve. The only thing it does is it will give you a hoarse voice for a couple of hours and it's hard to swallow. That night I went home. My wife thought I died. I slept for 14 hours. She took a mirror and put it underneath my nose, made sure that I was sleeping 14 hours straight. Never woke up, never moved, nothing. Slept for 14 hours. The next day I go back and get it and do the same thing on the other side. And basically what it does is it resets your fight or flight, and it helps minimize the symptoms of what you're dealing with. It is not a cure-all. It's not a fix. The doc will be the first one to tell you. He's had people that it did not work on. He's had people that it's lasted 10 years, and he's had people that it's lasted 3 weeks. It all based on where you are with your aspect of how you're dealing with stress in your life. Mine, it lasted about 6 months, 6 to 7 months, and I would go back and get a new set of shots. And it would help me with therapy. And he'll be the first one to tell you, you cannot just do this alone. It has to be done in therapy. It has to be done with other aspects of things. The beauty of it is a cop can have it done because it's no different than getting a tooth filled. It's just an anesthetic, right? And then you go back to duty the next day. So it's not pharmaceuticals. It's not anything. With therapy, you can continue to do this, and it helps you kind of alleviate some of the symptoms that you're dealing with. So then you can then deal with them with therapy. So I'll pause there and we can dive in further.
Well, so my only question then is that if it's no different than therapy, then does it still negatively affect them as far as having a record of receiving mental health treatment then?
Well, you're in therapy either way, right? I mean,
okay.
You're in therapy. So and I don't know, I guess every state's different. You know, some of the states have a rule that if you are suicidal, then you have to report that the clinician has to report back to being in a law enforcement capacity or a first responder capacity. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to get into that.
No,
right?
No.
But from a regard of dealing with a capacity of, hey, I'm dealing with some issues, and from that, there's no pharmaceuticals that's going to alter your mind, is where I'm going with that aspect of things, right? From that regard.
Yeah, my personal opinion on medication, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not any of those things, but I have PTSD myself, and trying to combat this, I wasn't taking medication while I was in the military, and then when I got out, that was a significant emotional event within itself, and for a long time I struggled after I separated from the military, and when I went to the VA and started picking back up my mental health treatment, exactly the same thing that happened to you without the additional diagnoses was they tried to throw a handful of medications at me. It's almost, and you can tell me your opinion, but it almost felt to me like they were just trying to almost shut me up so I didn't have to come back and continuously report that I was having trouble. They would rather me be drunk off of medication that they give me sitting in a corner so I don't have to worry about having conversations about it with anybody.
Yeah. It's a Band-Aid, and you're addressing a symptom. You're not addressing root cause.
Yep.
And that's not the purpose of this at all, from my regard. Right.
Good.
And I don't think that there is no defined answer to this, right?
No.
It is ever going. You have hallucinogenics that are showing great promise right now with MDMA and ketamine and mushrooms and a bunch of different things. There's a ton of research going on that are showing great results. And it's a green field right now on different avenues to help people deal with this. And it's going to be ever changing as it continues to evolve. And we just have to have an open mind and continue to go down the road of, hey, let's see what happens and how we can get better at what we're doing right at the end of the day. So
I agree. And we're right at about 30 minutes, but I want to let you know that I appreciate you going out there and trying to make a difference with this. And thank you for sharing your process with my audience, because I really feel like the only way to make a change is through education, awareness, and advocacy. And it seems like you're doing all three of those things, and it took you having to go through it so that you would be willing to address it. And so that's not an easy thing to share.
Yeah.
I have some things that I bring up sometimes on my other live streams that I do, and sometimes I have a hard time not tearing up right here on camera.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
So just being willing to share it. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a guest here. Just as a closing comment, do you have anything that you want to say to my audience that's maybe a message that you want to share or something specific that you want to share?
Yeah. So, a couple of different things. So outercirclefoundation.org, there's a ton of resources. There's a ton of information on our website. We do have a golf outing on October 10th. If you're in the Atlanta area, you want to come out. It's a great day. We have a bagpiper. We have an honor guard. We have Kelly Bishop, who's coming in. She's a Nashville recording artist. We speak at private companies, and we talk about this because there's a lot of vets out there working, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to approach it from a company perspective. And there's a lot of different things out there, and there's a lot of different opportunities for the vets to get involved. Don't think that you have to deal with this on your own. There's a ton of resources. There's a ton of different ways. Just because you have it does not mean that you have a stigma, does not mean that you're a broken person. Look at me and look at others, right? We can do it. Come together, use some of the resources, come out and reach out. We're here for you. It's a broad world, and we're here for you. So come out and reach out.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you doing what you do. Please stick around after I close this out.
You got it.
And then we can talk for a couple more minutes, or a few, or maybe a half hour, whatever you're comfortable with and you have time with.
You got it.
So thank you for watching this, whether it's now or later on. And if you agree with what he's saying and the information resonates with you, and you want more to find out about what Matt is doing out there, please like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can see more of these guests that are doing great things and learn more about what's happening in the entrepreneur and also the nonprofit communities. And keep the conversation going. Make sure you comment below so that either me or Matt or somebody can ask questions about what you have to say or whatever. Conversation is conversation. Doesn't matter if it happens digitally or in person. You gotta make sure you're talking about these things. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Matt, for being a guest.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Take care, guys.